Well, here we go. Well, welcome everyone to a Take Action call where, what our goal is not only to inspire you into action, but really give you some tools to move your business forwards. And it's always a treat to interview these amazing individuals. And tonight, we have a dynamic individual joining us. In fact, he's been a researcher for over 32 years. So yeah, hard to believe, 32 years. For our company, he's actually published, peer-reviewed and published 5 research studies, and I'm told there's a 6th one in the work. But this gentleman, I mean, guys, I have a cheat sheet here. Let me tell you all the accolades, right? Leading international nutritionist and applied physiology scientist, keynote speaker, consultant. Get this, Amazon #1 best-selling author. Has served as a performance physiology and nutritional expert for some of the nation's most elite. For instance, Special Forces, Green Berets, Olympic medalists, world-class athletes like boxing, cycling, rowing, as well as the NHL Hockey Association. He has received or been inducted to 3 different leading or fellows and 3 leading health organizations, the American College of Sports Medicine, the Obesity Society, and the International Society of Sports Nutrition. He's published, yes, 5 for us in Isagenix, but he's published more than 60 peer-reviewed papers, and he's published over 80 abstracts. Some of his articles have been released in very prominent medical journals, American Journal of Preventative Medicine, the Journal of Clinical Medicine, and the list goes on and on. And as well, many of you may have seen him in the Wall Street Journal, Fox News Prevention, even Oprah has featured him in the O magazine. So it is my absolute treat to welcome to the call for this evening my dear friend, Dr. Paul Arciero. How are you doing, Paul?
Oh, Warren, I'm looking around. Who is this guy you're talking about? It's always interesting when you hear these kind of things, and we all have this, right? I mean, when we sit down, you yourself and your lovely wife, you always have to make sure that people understand that that's kind of what I do. It's not always necessarily who I am, and that's one of the things that I'm excited to talk to you about, although I know we're going to stay very focused on the research. But, you have to always compartmentalize what we do and then who we are at the most basic core of our existence. And it's a real honor to be here with you. And I just have to comment on one thing. Your energy is palpable. I mean, whenever anybody is around you, I'm sure you've heard this many times before, but, when people think of Warren Lance, they just think of high energy. So it's a thrill to be here with you. So I'm excited to dive into this.
Well, it's interesting where this call comes from, and I think everyone's going to be in for an absolute treat. We did a call, I think you remember it, with a doctor out of LA. I believe his first name was Patrick. And we were going back and forth. I believe the crew at Serious Cycling was twisting his arm to actually get on that Zoom call with you. Yeah. And what was so interesting is Patrick was just bombarding you going, look, fast weight loss is bad. You lose lean muscle mass. He goes, you can go on some sort of diuretic, calorie restricted program. You can get injections that burn out your adrenal glands. And you know what? At the end of it, you may drop the weight, but if you actually understood the cost to the human body, you wouldn't do it. And I mean, he was just peppering you. And what really blew me away was you just immediately agreed with them, which sort of neutralized them. And that's the thing, no point arguing, but you agreed with them. And you said, yeah, absolutely. No arguments there at all. But what you ended up saying was, we know Isagenix makes people look pretty on the outside. We know that. But when you design that 64-week study, that's over a year, guys, 64-week study, it was to look at your health markers and the impact on the human body. And what you ended up saying to him was that you've never seen a nutritional program that impacts human health or a pharmaceutical drug that impacts human health to the degree that the Isagenix system did. And I was just like, I was getting goosebumps. It was absolutely remarkable. So I sort of want to take it from there, Paul, and share with our listeners what the heck's going on. I mean, it's pretty exciting, is it not? Like, I mean, the impact that we can have.
It is. And, what you just described, I remember that call very vividly. I was sitting in my car and, he was, bouncing off all these things. And the truth of the matter is that he was right. I mean, we all know. I mean, people that are on here right now watching the two of us and watching me now speaking about this, many have probably themselves been somebody who's experienced that rapid weight loss and that ability to, drop a few pounds when they need to, doing all kinds of different things. And those are abundant. I mean, they're everywhere. But unfortunately, there's so much misinformation and misguiding of people down those rabbit holes of that rapid weight loss, that, immediate gratification of a change in their external body and how it looks. And that's unfortunate because it sets us up for some, unfortunately, detrimental health consequences later on in life if we continue to expose ourselves to those fads and those extreme ways of losing weight. So what I wanted to do was say, hey, listen, I've been at this for a long time. At the time that Isagenix came to me, I'd been, hunkered down in my lab and working side by side with real people experiencing real life challenges in terms of health improvement. And I didn't want to put them through another fast, gimmicky, fad type of a weight loss program. So I said, you know what? I want one component of this study that I'm going to, invest my time and energy, resources of my staff, as well as Isagenix funding to support the study. But then
the funding, let me just interrupt here, because this is a point that comes up often, as you just said it. Well, Isagenix funded it. So guess what? If Isagenix just happens to be another gimmicky weight loss program that makes us look good on the outside, but really has detrimental effect to the inside, they could just kill it and no one would find out.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, that's an issue that, always is going to come up. The questioning of who's funding the study, who's behind it, who's backing what you're talking about, Dr. Paul. And this is how you have to respond to it. Look, the truth of the matter is the money has to come from somewhere to do scientific research. It can come from the government. It can come from other philanthropic organizations. It can come from pharmaceutical companies. It can come from health and wellness companies. The most important point is that the research itself, the integrity of the research and that which is going on in that setting of the data collection and the interaction with the participants has to be held in its highest level of independence and third-party objectivity. That's what matters. The funding is crucial. And as long as you're fully disclosing where that funding has come from, that's a huge check mark for any peer-reviewed scientific community. That's all they care about. They just want to know that, hey, listen, you've received this funding. Have you disclosed it, number one? And how was the study conducted under the guidelines of the highly scrutinized and high credibility, high validity of the scientific method? And all those were checked, obviously, because I conducted the study. So just real quickly, I want to comment on this first right of refusal, because this is really important. So many times, even if those things were done that I just described, and that's all, top shelf, high level of credibility and validity and scientific merit. And we followed those steps. But there is one other one, and that is the funding agency can still say, we want first right of refusal. And what that means is that regardless of what comes about from the data and the findings, they can determine whether or not it wants to be published. Isagenix did not request, nor did I grant first right of refusal to them. That is huge, meaning all of the data that was collected, all of the findings that I generated were up to me and my research team and the scientific community to determine whether or not it was worthy of publication. And that should silence and quiet any critic, whether, of whether the funding came from Isagenix or from the government or from a philanthropic organization. The fact that there was no first right of refusal, I was the one in my research team, and then the experts in the scientific community were the ones who decided whether or not the data was worthy of publication. So it stands alone, and it stands the test of time.
So what you're really saying is, yes, they funded it, but ultimately you and your scientific team and the community were responsible for pushing out whatever the results were, good or bad. Isagenix couldn't kill it, which is, I think that is critical. And again, it just speaks volumes to who Isagenix is. So fantastic on that. So as you said to Patrick, you said you weren't concerned about the outside of the body, because we know Isagenix makes people look pretty on the outside. It was all about these internal health markers. So what kind of things were you actually looking at during that 64-week study? Great.
So in addition to the go-to external markers, body weight, right? Body fat, belly fat, and muscle mass, how people look on the outside. We wanted to dive deep inside. And so not only did we look at changes in their body composition, but we looked at their visceral fat. So that's what you can only measure by going inside the body and actually measuring the quantities of that fat that's surrounding the vital organs. So that was number one. And then number two, we said, all right, I want to look at more health related markers that are going on inside the body. So I was looking at things like the cardiovascular system. So I was measuring blood lipids, cholesterol, both good and bad cholesterol, triglycerides. We measured the blood pressure. We measured the heart rate. We measured the blood vessels' ability to respond to variations in pressure. We call it arterial stiffness. Arterial function is the scientific word, but in lay terms, it's the blood vessel stiffness, to see how stiff they were. So we measured those markers, and those are really invasive markers that are happening inside that you really don't have an opportunity to measure in most other weight loss gimmicky type programs. So we were really diving deep. And then we measured the endocrine system. That's the hormonal system. Things like the blood sugar, glucose level, insulin level, things like the leptin level. That's the hormone that quantifies, or at least lets us know what levels of energy we have in our body, leptin. We also measured ghrelin, and that's the hunger hormone. So it was very, very comprehensive. But then we went one step further, of course, I was driven by this onslaught of attention in the media, in scientific papers that talk about toxicity. And we know that that's a primary trigger to initiating disease inside of our body, the level of toxins in the body. So I measured more than 11 PCB, polychlorinated biphenyls, in the body, more than 11 of them. And we quantified how they changed in the blood in each of these 40 people. It's a very, very expensive test, but I wanted to have a complete picture of the level of toxins and how the body was responding to this weight loss that they were engaging in over the 64 weeks. And then I was also measuring how well the cells responded at the cellular level. We call it oxidative stress. And there are markers in the blood that we can quantify that measure oxidative stress in the cells of the body. And at the same time, we can measure the good part that's happening in the cells called antioxidant capacity. So I was measuring the balance between that which was damaging to the body, oxidative stress, and that which was supporting and nourishing and providing health and vitality to the body in the levels of antioxidants. So we had a full comprehensive camera of not only what was happening on the outside of each of these people's body, but also right inside the hood and measuring all of the parts of what makes up their body.
Wow. Okay, and so this study went on for over a year. So what kind of things were you seeing? I mean, you're the doctor. You actually measured it, and from a doctor's opinion, I heard you say you haven't seen anything impact human health to this degree. Like, how is that possible? Like, I mean, how much, like, how did things shift to make you say something like that's a pretty bold statement?
It was, yeah. I mean, and to this day, it's. I use the word, groundbreaking, and I think I remember seeing one of the bullets that you had here in regards to the topic tonight. But it was nothing short of being groundbreaking from a scientific perspective, because in each of those areas that I just described, the internal happening of the body composition, the visceral fat, that was reduced significantly by as much as 34%. I mean, even for me to, say that number, that's absurd. In fact, I was just speaking in Minnesota to the, wonderful people of Minnesota over the weekend. And I had to report that finding, to all of them, because there was many new people in the audience. And again, 2-3 years later, after the study has been completed and it's been published, I still have the good fortune of being able to stand in front of a group of people and say that their visceral fat, that fat that's the most harmful to the organs in our body, was reduced by 34%. Now, in real life terms, that's the equivalent of a basketball. So on average, these people lost the equivalent of a basketball in their abdominal belly region. So just incredible in terms of what we found. The levels of the good antioxidant capacity in the body went up by almost 10%. Now that doesn't sound like a big number, but in terms of how tightly the body regulates the antioxidant activity, that which is, we call them the scavengers that are going around in the body and cleaning up all the bad debris, all the bad guys. So all the bad guys we have circulating, that's our antioxidant capacity. For that to go up in the general scheme of how the body engages on a regular basis, that was incredible for us to observe that. At the same time, there was an equal, if not even greater, reduction in the oxidative stress. I call them the Tasmanian devils, right? And I don't know how many people are familiar with, people out in Australia, what the Tasmanian devils are. In cartoon lingo, the roadrunner, the Roadrunner the Tasmanian Devil. So I use that analogy because, when you see it as a cartoon, the Tasmanian Devils are spinning around and they wreak havoc all throughout the body. That's oxidative stress. And for that to drop as much as it did at the same time that the antioxidant capacity went up, that was just a mind-blowing finding for us. So how
much did the oxidative stress drop?
So these numbers, I have them actually in front of me, so I'm going to just take the time to look at it real quickly. So it was, the numbers of how they changed was on par of, it was over 10%. So here if we have, a balancing of oxidative stress and antioxidant capacity, the body's always trying to, if you can get an even level, the fact that we had a 10% increase in antioxidant capacity and a 10% reduction in oxidative stress. I think it was a little bit more than 10%, but I'm erring on the side of conservative numbers here. That's a 20% delta. That is massive when it comes to this balancing act of the good guys and the bad guys that are circulating inside the body and interacting with the cells of the body. So that in and of itself was just remarkable.
When you say oxidative stress, that's your body releasing the toxins, the PCBs, sort of like into your bloodstream and everything. And that's where it wreaks havoc. But the fact that the antioxidant capacity went up, in layman's terms, does that not absolutely prove that we were supporting the body in eliminating those toxins? Because if oxidative stress is going way up, there could be problems. And the fact that oxidative capacity has increased, that means we're actually getting the bad stuff out.
Yeah. So let me just comment on that. So what we measured, and this is really important in terms of the entire aspect, the entire process, I'll call it, of toxin removal, and that it's a more than a one-step process. The first step of toxin removal from the body is what we call the mobilization phase, and that is the releasing from the storage depot where the toxins are stored. And toxins love fat. So toxins are stored in our fat, in our body, primarily in the visceral fat. That's what makes visceral fat so harmful and dangerous to our body. And so what we documented was this first step of the toxin, removing process. And that was the appearance of these toxins in the blood. Because what happens once you release them, of course, is that they're eventually degraded and they're removed from the body. They're actually, expelled from the body in various forms. So we measure them in various ways. I won't get into many details, but the mobilization is the first step in what we call the detoxification process. So I can only comment on that because that's what we measured. We only measured the first step, which is the critical step of initiating detoxification. And in that case, what happened was the levels of the toxins that were appearing in the blood went up significantly, nearly 25%. And that's a massive, increase. Now, people often say, when they see that, they say, oh, well, then that can't be good. I mean, if we're having more toxins appear in the blood, that must be really bad for us. And I say, well, it can be, but that's actually a good thing if you're having an increase. And the reason is because they're no longer being stored in the cells of the body where they do their damage. So yeah, you want to get them into the blood so that you can eventually excrete them. So, we have to be very clear about that. So the fact that we documented this massive increase. Now, what your comment is very appropriate, because in most cases when the body is exposed to a harmful, toxic, noxic agent, it usually is picked up in the oxidative stress. And what did we just say happened with oxidative stress? I want to see if you were listening, Warren.
Well, oxidative stress, the antioxidant capacity went up by about 10%.
And what happened with oxidative stress?
It went down by about.
It went down. Exactly. So at the same time these toxins were being released into the blood, oxidative stress was significantly decreasing, and antioxidant capacity was significantly increasing. So are we having a healthy detoxification process occurring in the body? 100%. We have every piece of evidence to support that the changes that were happening inside the body were extremely favorable. So I can only comment on that. I can't say that the entire detoxification process resulted in a favorable response because we didn't measure all of those steps, but I can comment on the first and most critical step of the detoxification process, and that is the increase in the amount of toxins appearing in the blood. But the story gets, better than that, of course, because you would expect in most cases when you have something like that in the blood, oxidative stress would, just skyrocket upward. And in fact, we showed the opposite. It actually decreased the antioxidant capacity.
So for our nutritional system. Now, what about, so that's toxins getting out, because that's really what Isagenix is all based upon, right? Very gently, the cellular cleansing technology. Now, you also mentioned cardiovascular markers. So for the layman, what exactly does that mean? And what were you measuring there? Because I think those are important too.
Oh, they're super important. Yeah, I mean, they play, I would say next in line with toxins that interact with the cells of our body and create damage and disease and illness in our body. The cardiovascular variables are right next in line. And so those would be things like the blood lipids. That would be things like your total cholesterol, your good cholesterol, which is the HDL, that's the high density lipoprotein cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, which is the LDL, the low density lipoprotein cholesterol, and then the circulating fat globules in our blood called triglycerides. So it's just blood fat that's circulating in our body. And in every case, total cholesterol down, LDL cholesterol down, HDL cholesterol, the good one, which is so hard to change, was pretty constant. There was a slight increase in the women. Men stayed pretty consistent. The triglycerides plummeted. So by all markers of the most invasive, what we use is these proxy measures of heart health in terms of the circulating amounts of cardiovascular health markers, in this case, cholesterol and triglyceride. Those all change in a very, very favorable state. But we went one step further. Not only were we looking at the blood markers of heart health, we were also looking at the actual mechanics of heart health, and that would be blood pressure. And what we saw was a remarkable reduction in both their systolic, which is the higher number, that's the pressure that we measure in the blood vessels, in the arteries, right as the heart contracts. So just think about this, as your heart is contracting and pushing down on itself and releasing blood into our circulation, that exerts a certain amount of pressure measured in millimeters of mercury in each of the blood vessels, in this case in the major arteries of the body. We usually measure it in the brachial artery, which is where you wear the blood pressure cuff. For most people, that is the first sign of heart disease, right? We measure that when we go to the doctor's office all the time. What do? They slap a blood pressure cuff on us and they want to see if we have what we call hypertension, high blood pressure. And in the case of this study, with no other medical intervention, the systolic blood pressure, that which is experiencing the heart contraction, went down drastically by more than 10 points. I mean, that's pretty notable. That's at the level of certain medications that we give people, pharmacological medications. So the fact that it went down without any pharmacological drug intervention by that much was remarkable. But the diastolic, that's the pressure that we measure in the blood vessels when the heart is at rest. It also exerts, there's a certain level of pressure that is exerted in our blood vessels. And that number we don't want to have high, especially when the heart is resting, as you can imagine. And that number dropped by about 7 to 8 points. I mean, that's just incredible. So the fact that both the blood pressures, systolic and the diastolic, the contraction blood pressure and the relaxation blood pressure went down that much is an incredible finding without any intervention of drugs or traditional pharmaceutical interventions. But then we also went one step further. We have a very sophisticated technique in my laboratory that allows us to measure the stiffness of the blood vessel. That's different than the blood pressure because it's the responsiveness of the blood vessel to respond to pressure changes and its overall stiffness rating. We call it arterial artery stiffness. And that was reduced significantly in the 40 men and women that followed the Isagenix weight loss system. So there were some really incredible, internal changes that were occurring in both the toxin response, the oxidative stress, antioxidant capacity, and then the heart healthy markers that we have. So those in and of themselves were just, they stand alone, obviously, because they're published in separate papers, each of that data. So the scientific community felt they were significant and compelling enough to keep them compartmentalized all by themselves because they were just so remarkable in terms of what we found. So yeah, it was really a lot of fun to be able to test all these things.
When we look at the system, typically, if someone's getting a pharmaceutical drug to impact blood pressure, or they're getting something to impact be it your blood lipids or your cholesterol levels or something like that, is it you usually see one drug that does it all? Yeah. Or is it usually multiple drugs that help impact all these different health markers?
It's a lot of times, Warren, that's a very, very good point. A lot of times it's multiple. It's not just one that can do it. It's not a one-stop shop medications. And that's the problem that people have, right? I mean, they go on a blood pressure lowering, they go on a blood lipid lowering, the statins do one thing. Some of the antihypertensive medications do another thing. But here's the problem. When you have those different drugs interacting with each other, that's when people get into a vicious cycle of dealing and then trying to treat the side effects, right? Because sometimes the side effects are the worst part of going on pharmacological interventions. It's not so much the drug itself or the condition, I should say itself, but it's the drugs themselves that you're taking that really impact people in such a negative way. And so, yeah, I mean, I have the numbers in front of me. I'm looking at them right now, and I'm looking at the change in the blood cholesterol level. That dropped 28 milligrams per deciliter. That is phenomenal. I mean, they went from, the high 180s to 160. That's just an incredible drop. And that's level of again, medication. The LDL went from 121 to 104. That's a 15 milligram per deciliter drop in their bad cholesterol. That is an incredible and really positive, favorable finding. Triglycerides dropped by 50 milligrams per deciliter. So, I could go on, but let me just do the blood pressure. So I undershot it. Well, I was pretty close, actually, now that I look at it. It was a 10 millimeter of mercury drop in the systolic blood pressure, as I said. And it was an 8 millimeter of mercury drop in the diastolic blood pressure. So awesome stuff. I mean, I go back and I look at the data, the numbers, there's so much data, but when I have an opportunity to dive in, I'm actually proud of myself that I get to remember as accurately as I do sometimes these numbers, because there's so many of them, but, just being able to say these again, I mean, these are just really fascinating and compelling. So I hope everyone that's watching this, who knows somebody, or maybe they themselves who's struggling with high blood pressure, who's struggling with high blood lipids, you got the answer right here. And these people were able to, this is really important, sustain these for 64 weeks, more than a year that they were following the Isagenix system. So that's huge.
Body composition, lean muscle mass, overall percentage of fat drop. I mean, it did, the finished result, people were looking better on the outside as well. Like, what were some of the weight loss markers who have over the 64 weeks?
The weight loss was phenomenal, but before I get to that, the blood sugar, right? Everyone's concerned because diabetes is right now, currently, one of the fastest growing epidemics we have in North America. And I'm sure it's similar in Canada, but definitely in the States and in Mexico, in North America overall, type 2 diabetes is on a fast track of increase in epidemic. And we have to do something about it. These individuals' blood sugar dropped 10 milligrams per deciliter, 10 points. When they were on this. I mean, that's amazing. It took them out of the danger zone. The insulin level was nearly cut in half. And that's the hormone that we need to take the blood sugar and dispose it in the cells. And you don't want to have high insulin because that's not healthy for the body. And in our study, we showed that the insulin dropped by nearly 40%. 40%, 40. So great stuff. But in terms of the body composition stuff, it just kept on getting better and better. And I have it right here, and everyone's heard these results, or maybe not, some of those that are new. On average, they lost 25 pounds in just the 11-week time period. So just in the 11 weeks, that first 11 weeks that we were monitoring them, they lost 25 pounds. And then as they stayed on it, they were continuing to show improvement. In terms of their body fat, they lost massive amounts of body fat. When I look at the, the percent changes in their body fat, that occurred. Oh, this is the data from the full year. Wow, I was giving you some of that data that happened in the full year. But in terms of their body fat, they went from 46% to under 40% for some of them. And again, these were people that were in desperate need of a healthy lifestyle intervention. So, massive decreases in their body fat. The belly fat, the abdominal fat that we talked about, they had about a 22% reduction. Some had even more, but on average, it was about a 24% reduction in the abdominal visceral fat, just the abdominal fat. The visceral fat was about 34%. So massive changes. Lean body mass. People often talk about, man, when you lose weight, it doesn't discriminate. And that's usually the case. In fact, people do look good when they go on a weight loss diet, and even some of these gimmicky ones. And so they have this rapid weight loss, and you say to them, wow, you look really great. But if they really measured their lean body mass, they would be surprised, because in most cases of other weight loss programs, they show a significant reduction in the quantity of their healthy, lean, what we call metabolically active muscle mass. And I'm happy to report that we showed a 9% increase in the proportion of their overall body weight increase in their lean, metabolically active muscle mass. That's phenomenal. And that in and of itself is probably the most profound change that occurred in the study was that as they were losing all of this massive amount of weight, primarily, as we just said, body fat, their lean body mass proportionally was going up by 9%. So cool stuff. Yeah, I love talking about it just because, you know, this is stuff that was going on deep down inside their body that you kind of, you know, didn't see on the outside cover. And that's what I get most excited about. So this is really fun being able to share this. Thank you for providing me this platform.
One little, because we're not doctors and I want to keep this sort of compliant, is just to realize that what Dr. Paul proved out is our nutritional cleansing system, okay, in fact does very gently pull the toxins from the body, and then clearly the nutrition, the replenishing aspects from our shakes, right, replenishes the body. The body's the miracle. Again, we're not taking drugs. We're just helping the body eliminate the bad stuff. We put in all this great nutrition and we allow the body to sort of bounce back, function the way it was designed to function, right? The body's the miracle. We're just giving it the nutrition and getting the bad stuff out to allow that to happen, which is absolutely remarkable. Paul, I mean, I'm fired up. I just all these notes and it's sort of like, oh my goodness. Now, you were touching on other things as far as the lean muscle mass. I know there's ways that we can enhance it because we always want to maintain our lean muscle mass. And I know your best-selling book on Amazon, protein pacing, all that. Would you be open to maybe coming back and doing a little bit of a series of calls touching on, say, intermittent fasting and what is the right type of protein to get lean muscle mass increase? And just would you be open to continuing this call? I mean, I know we could talk all night, but would you be open to doing a few more calls with us?
You know, Warren, listen, as you know, I'm in high demand and I don't do this for everybody, but you are a very good friend. I think you were one of the first people that I met in Isagenix, and we hit it right off right away. I would be absolutely honored. I would enjoy that a lot. I would very much like to continue speaking about what it is that is driving so much of these favorable changes that we've observed in these people. And I think it's important to get this out there. So yeah, I'd be honored to be able to jump on and carry on this conversation and target some of these specific aspects of the program that you just talked about, the nutritional cleansing, the protein pacing, I think is so important. We can maybe even introduce what effect the exercise has in all of this as well, and how it impacts it, using the performance line that Isagenix has. You know, people often ask me, I'll just kind of throw this in there because I think it's so important. You know, you were the scientist, you studied this and you measured it and you quantified it. And this group of people, there was 40 of these people from diverse places in their lives and diverse backgrounds and, you know, remarkable findings that you had. What was so unique about it? And what I tell them is, well, the scientific data stands alone, you know, that was what was so remarkable, but it was the personal growth and transformation that happened in these people. And that is something that I don't want to ever overlook and get overshadowed by the scientific aspect, because the change that occurred in all of their lives from an emotional standpoint was just so powerful, that, you know, that needs to be talked about. But then beyond that, I would say it's getting this word out that there's healthier alternatives, that with all the misinformation that we hear about, with all of the misguided opportunities that we have to introduce healthy lifestyle into our lives, I want to make sure that we get this out, because this is scientifically proven and known to work, and that's what's exciting for me.
Wow. Again, thank you so much. And as you said, it is our responsibility to get it out there. And I think for those of us that are participating on the business side and sharing Isagenix, what we got to remember is if people really realized what was going on internally in their body, they would never come off auto ship. I mean, they would stay on Isagenix for the rest of their lives. I mean, I will be on Isagenix for the rest of my lives. I know my boys will. You will, your family. I've been in your home. I mean, all your families is drinking shakes because you know what these products do. And that's our responsibility, guys. We have to spread the word that Isagenix is nutrition for life. You absolutely want to stay on this long term. So, Dr. Paul, thank you so very much, my friend. It has been a blast.
Absolutely, always.
And we will certainly chat soon. Good night, everyone. Okay, I stopped live. Hang on.